Listen up. We are back with another episode of the Construction Mentor Podcast. My name is Ike. I am your host. You can follow this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and you can always catch my stuff on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. What are we here to do? We're here to promote the construction industry as a viable path to affluency for anybody who wants it bad enough, and for the people that are there and want to either go out on their own or take their career to the next height. It's critical for you to be aware of what tools are out there at your disposal, which is why today we have Andy Leek, head of product for ConCntric. We're going to talk about what that tool is, or what that platform can offer you to help you run your business for anything Precon. So we're going to talk about what Precon is. First we're going to talk about what Andy's career was like, because he wasn't always in software, right? He actually was on the design side and the build side and the design build side. And then he found himself working for ConCntric, taking this powerful platform to industry professionals across the board. But then we're going to find out why he made the jump and what their offer is to our industry and why they're so much better than everybody else. So with that, Andy, how are you?
Doing great. Appreciate you having me on today, Ike.
So, Andy, you hail from the heartland, from the middle of the country, St. Louis area. Always been from St. Louis?
Always been from the Midwest. Been in the St. Louis area for about the last 25 years, give or take. So, yeah, born and bred Midwest. So, I got very hands-on approach to technology and to the industry itself, I guess.
And you've been around in the industry for 30 years, no matter what side it's been on. Is that right?
Yeah, I grew up in a time where you actually did vocational school along with college prep in high school. And I got to do plenty of summer and winter jobs where I was helping to, remodel homes or fix up old cars, things like that. And it kind of evolved. It was almost like a childhood apprenticeship, but I was able to put that knowledge to good work. And right out of high school, was working while going to college full time. So learned a lot along the way. It's been a fun journey.
Yeah, that's a path that I try to advocate for as much as possible for any young person. It's like, don't wait until you're in your mid-20s to get job experience, right? Pick up a shovel, pick up a broom, go on a job site, do anything with your hands, because that will show on a resume. And when you have that experience, and you go to college for something like architecture or construction management, it only makes it that much more impactful because you have something to reference, right? So now, did you go to college for architecture or construction management?
Architecture.
So you went for architecture?
Went to architecture school, became a licensed architect, got a little minor in marketing as well, because you can't just design nice things. You actually have to be able to sell them also. So learned a little bit about that side of things early on. So all tools that helped me as I got into the industry and started learning about design build, how you really deliver projects, understanding how buildings go together, really learning about context. I think context is key to all these discussions. Is you really need to have enough understanding of the constraints that you're dealing with so that you can put the right solution in place. And so that is a part of the conversation, whether you're talking about design, construction, your technology, your business, and your workflows, things like that. I think context is king in all these conversations.
Now, there's a recurring theme that you just said. And again, he started in architecture and he worked his way around the table to even the software side of construction, right? So Andy's been around, right? And we're going to talk about each step around the table that he took. But the recurring theme that I want to make sure that young people out there are hearing is what you just said about selling, right? It's important. A lot of young people want to do business. I speak to high school kids and they're like, oh, yeah, I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to start my own business. And it's like, well, doing what? You have to have a skill, right? So Andy got a skill. He had a hands-on skill that he then took to the design side, and he got an education that he could then sell. So you have to get a skill to sell people. That's how you get a business, right? So if you can't develop a skill and you don't know how to sell it, you're not going to own your own business. You're not going to do anything, okay? And you're not going to get that by getting a business degree. Trust me. You're going to end up in a cube farm somewhere, which is why I think the construction industry is so unique, right? Oftentimes the skill, not oftentimes, the skill always becomes the skill always comes before the confidence, and the confidence enables you to sell, right? So you definitely had that. So architecture, what was it like coming out, 30 years ago? Do you have any pulse on what an architect makes in the St. Louis area now, coming out of school? Because you do need to go to school and you do need to become, licensed to be an architect. I like to just create context for people for what they can make, because architecture is a good path, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what in the St. Louis area, Midwest, like what's an architect looking at coming up?
I think, it really is based on the type of work that you're doing. And I think something that's really important as well is I think the great thing about architecture is that it teaches you to be a generalist right out of the gate. You know a little bit about a lot of things, and then over time you become more of a subject matter expert, depending on whether it's healthcare or commercial office, senior living, retail. I mean, all these different specialties really start to evolve. I mean, labs in particular, is a really great space to be in. Data centers, things like that. They all have their very unique qualities that you have to really understand at a very granular level, and to get to that level of resolution takes experience. So I think if you're doing well in the industry, you're making well over six figures. I mean, it's an industry you definitely want to get into. Architects are there's never enough, especially really really great architects who have really taken the time to get that specific and understand the craft. And it's a craft, it's a practice, it's something that takes that experience. It takes understanding how to collaborate with others. It's really easy to have a great idea and think that it's the best idea, but then when you realize that you also have customers and other stakeholders that also have a say in the game, then you learn to come up with alternatives and options that may not have been your first choice, and that's okay. And that's part of the fun, is you get to design something, maybe more than the amount of times you wanted to, but that's where I think the early stage of design, just much like Precon, is so critical. Is you get in early, you test out some ideas. They are way cheaper to exercise in that stage than when you're out on the job site with a shovel or a hammer in your hand. At that point, they become really expensive changes. So that's where I think architecture is a great way to start into the industry, is fundamentally understanding the process of creation with stakeholders, with collaborators, bringing everybody along for the ride, and making sure that you have, everybody's focused in on the same target at the end. And if we can, pull everybody together, have an open conversation, and arrive at the same ultimate solution, that's where architecture and pre-construction are really critical. That's the plan. Once you come up with the plan, you come up with the vision, now it's time to go execute. And so I think that's where a lot of folks lose out on the value of that early stage of planning is, once you have absolute clarity on what you're going to build, how quickly you can build it, what your budget's going to be, then it's all about execution. And doing that, is not easy either. I mean, there's all kinds of things that jump up in your way when you're trying to build things. Weather, weather here, just trying to pour concrete because it's pouring down rain, or weather impacting the procurement of materials. There might be a hurricane in Florida like there just was, and now all of a sudden you can't get plywood. And so what does that do to your schedule?
Or God forbid, it gets cold in Texas and screws up procurement for 2 years, right? Right. I was so sick of hearing about the deep freeze that happened in Texas and like a pipe burst somewhere 2 years ago, and apparently everything that I needed came through Texas. You touched on a few things there, and I would like to highlight the importance of experience. Now, architecture, I'm 100% transparent with any students that I speak to, whether it's at a high school or on this podcast. As far as construction related majors or professions go, starting out, architecture is on the lower end, right? However, once you get that experience, and considering that, and what does experience do, right? It helps you run into mistakes or code requirements, or, the more experience you get, the more obstacles are out there, and it helps you better navigate those as you move forward. So the more experience that you get, and it's very quick to get experience as an architect, your pay increase goes rapidly, right? I know many people that in just a few years, they're well above six figures in architecture. So it is a great niche to go into. And what we talk about with pre-construction, and I'd be curious to hear your opinion on how that enabled or empowered you as you made the transition into the GC world, because you went to the builder side, right? You ended up going to a major GC in the Midwest. But Precon is so often overlooked and so important. It's so important to the point where, I forget who made this graph, but it's the old fish graph, right? So if you picture a goldfish and you bite the head off, on one side you start up and to the left, and then you end down and to the right. And that is when you spend a ton of time. So at the top of the graph, a lot of time and effort and diligence in pre-construction, the overall duration and cost of your project goes down, over time. Now, the other side of that fish would be you start on the bottom left corner, right? You start like on the X and Y axis where they meet, and that goes up to the end of the fishtail. And what does that tell you? That tells you the more you rush into a project, the less you think about it, the less pre-con you do, the less diligence you do up front or time you spend in design and planning, the more, or maybe not even time and effort, but if you don't have the right tools, wink, wink, what are we here to talk about? Right. Then the longer your project's going to be, and the more that more likely it's going to run over budget, which I think it's 75% of projects miss the schedule. And I want to say 80% run over budget. Right. So pre-con is absolutely critical. How did, before you get to what you're doing now with ConCntric and all the efforts in pre-con and that powerful tool that people can have to be on the right side of that graph, how did your experience as an architect help you when you went over to the GC side?
But I think I was fortunate that early on in my career, I was working with design build as the delivery method, the primary delivery method. And so I was learning both sides of it, at an amazing pace, honestly. Back in the early 2000s, you could not turn out office buildings fast enough, right? And so we were working like crazy just to try and keep up with the demand. And, the demand is what partially drove some of the technology that we ultimately implemented. And I think that's a really important thing to recognize today as well. I think for a long time, both architecture and the construction industry got a bad rap as not being technically sophisticated or not having great tools to work with. And, I think when you really get into construction, you really get into pre-con, you really get into architecture, you realize how complex, how complicated it really is. It is not easy. I mean, there is a lot of things that you have to take into effect, and it's like the ultimate calculus equation. I mean, all the variables change by the moment, whether on the job site or in the office. You have way too many inputs and probably not enough outputs. But like you said, with the graph, what I hear, thinking about that fundamentally is, if I didn't do a very good job in the planning stage, all I'm doing on the right-hand side is losing money and losing customers, because my reputation is going out to the side of the graph as well. And so that's where, putting that extra effort in the early stage makes a big difference. And so thinking back to the technology today, had I gone into architecture right now today with the tool set that's available to me today, with the BIM modeling tools, the coordination tools, the visualization tools, all the things that AI is bringing to the conversation, just the speed of going through that process, the repetition, that's what's key to becoming an expert or a professional. I'm scared to always use that word, expert. I think becoming well-versed, let's say. I think what's key is the repetition, being able to go and do something multiple times so that it starts to become muscle memory and you can move on to the next thing.
Right.
That, to me, I think was one of the hardest things to do for the profession 20, 30 years ago. Where I think we're getting to today is with the technology, with that repetition, with, the right groups of people working together on that delivery approach, you're getting an experience that's allowing you to build into that expertise much more rapidly. And, architects, fall into a lot of categories today. I mean, yes, there are, purebred designers and there are purebred technical, people that really understand fundamentally how a wall assembly goes together and all that kind of fun stuff. But then you have people that are in VDC, and, they are helping to weave together all these different needs and control all the different components of that project to actually get it put into place in the field, and making sure that everybody has the data need available. So
I hate to gloss. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I hate to gloss over acronyms. VDC, what for the layman, for the young person.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I sometimes acronym. I'll try not to.
Yeah, we all do that, right? And it's tough. But what does VDC mean? Why is that appealing?
So VDC is virtual design and construction. So it is effectively, it's a process. It's a space that has really heated up over probably the last 10 or 15 years, broadly. You had BIM, which, depending on your point of view, is a model or it's a process. It's a database. It happens to look like a building to some people. It looks like a schedule of values to other people. But VDC is really kind of the magicians that are working to coordinate all these different file types and software that have to work together to make sure that all the systems fit inside of the architectural vision. They all work correctly. They can be installed and prefabricated offsite to really deliver a project with these aggressive timelines and high levels of expectations.
Yeah, I think young people find that extremely appealing to be able to build something virtually before you actually go out and build it in the field. And there's tons of data, saying that, just like with Precon, right? If you have a strong Precon effort, if you have a strong VDC effort, wasted material goes down, install efficiencies goes up, time and money is saved everywhere. So how long did you spend in architecture, and then how long did you spend on the GC side before you made the jump over to ConCntric?
Well, I think I have a tattoo of being an architect, so I'm not ever allowed to not be an architect anymore.
Yeah.
But so, I've been largely in industry for 25-ish years, professionally. I made the transition officially from pure architect and design about 12, 13 years ago, where I was more focused on the technology side of things. And, that was early on when a lot of the cloud-based platforms were starting to get some of the roots put in place. You started to see the concept of integrated models where you could, federate different systems together to see if they would play nice and fit in the building or not. And so that was great timing. I mean, I was, coming from literally pencil and paper drafting in high school, working your way through Mylars and all that fun stuff into CAD and then into, modeling softwares. That's where the change really started to transition very quickly. And, part of what I got super excited about was the idea of these intersections where you could take technology that was built to do one thing. Maybe it was built to, look like a building or look like a schedule or look like an estimate. And you could start to weave those things together. And there was data points that actually, you could find what is that common thing? What's that element ID? Or, going to get pretty nerdy here, but what are those things that help tie time to money to a building, to a site, and give you context so you can start to make business decisions? That to me was super exciting.
There's a tremendous amount of value in what you just said. And I think if I want to highlight anything for the young people before we talk about, the nuts and bolts of how this gets implemented to somebody's business or business that they want to create, young people, prime example of somebody in an industry, and not every industry can say this. You start in one side of the table, you can transition into another side of the table. I know tons of people. I'm one of them. I used to be a mechanical engineer, designing HVAC, plumbing, and fire protection. Guess what? After 10 years, went over to the GC side. Andy, what would you say, 12, 13 years as an architect, and you got that scar. I would call that a scar, not a tattoo. And then you end up over on the GC side, right? So the same type of thing, from design to construction. And because of that context that you have as a designer, it helps you be a better builder, helps you be a better pre-construction builder, right? And both of us are now in roles where we are a little more technology based, and we are acknowledging all these data points that are out there that we can capture in certain ways and at certain points to make the building process or the Precon process more efficient and more impactful, to save more money and more time and increase safety and efficiency. And if you talk to Andy when he was at a Votech in, I don't know, the 90s, or 30 years might be the 80s, right?
90s. Come on.
90s, okay. So, when he was in the 90s in a Votech, and you said, hey, you're going to be the head of product for this major, groundbreaking software platform, he would have been like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, I'm not a computer geek, right? And I would have said the same thing. But again, there is no other industry, in my opinion, like the construction industry, that can afford you that opportunity if you so choose. And as long as you're out there and you're doing the right thing and you're working hard, they'll present themselves to you.
And I think there's an important part of that too, Ike, is that honestly, I think I would have gotten bored earlier had there not been this opportunity to make that evolution and grow. I think learning about something and becoming really good at it, mastering that skill is important. But at some point, if you're anything like me, you start to get bored and you want to learn new things. And fortunately, the last 20 years have, just given us all kinds of gifts in terms of technology. There's the cloud and there's these integration tools, but there's drones and laser scanners and, virtual reality and augmented reality. And through the AEC industry, being able to work with all these different technologies that are all, coming up, they're, come from the infancy stage up through the toddler stage. And even today, a lot of them are still very, very young technologies. We are still, as an industry, still just being inundated with a whole bunch of new things that are still in their early stage of development. And, they're business ready. I mean, I'll tell you that the technologies that are out there today are solid tech, and they are definitely something you can use in Precon all the way through construction. So really start to think about your life cycle approach in a different way of what is my suite of tools, and no longer limited to, a mouse and a pencil or a hammer and a screwdriver. I mean, I have all kinds of advanced technology I can be using to help inform the pre-construction planning phase.
Listen, we're telling people now on my jobs that just like you bring a hammer and chisel or a hammer and a screwdriver, just like you said, you better bring your phone. You better bring an iPad. It's a tool that you need. And a virtual headset is probably going to be the next tool that comes out that's going to be required, just like a hard hat. With some of the videos that I've seen, there's just always, commercials and new industry, forums and what do they call them? Why can't I think of the word? A convention where people are showcasing their stuff, right? Now, so you did 12, 13 years as an architect. You did another 12, 13 to hit around, the 25, 26 years on the GC side. And a couple of years ago, you decided to make a jump to totally tech. What was it about that was appealing to you? Was it the software, how groundbreaking it was? What was the appeal there for you to make that jump?
Well, again, I think I'd found that point in my career where I hadn't mastered everything, but I had made enough of an impact. And, really I learned enough about not so much the technology in of itself, but how to start to partner and work with other companies that were building new tech. I was fortunate to work with a lot of startups throughout my career, going way back to the early 2000s, where new tech that's coming on the scene that's being built by really technology oriented professionals, not construction or design oriented professionals. And you need to partner. I mean, I'm the last person to go and code something, but I know a lot about process and how you start to weave these things together. I think, with ConCntric, what was exciting to me was, I've met Steve, who is our CEO founder, obviously a little ways before I came on board officially, but we had some really great conversations early on. And I saw synergy there where there was this space in the industry that has not really been supported yet. It's funny to say, because we had CAD and BIM type tools and all these visualization tools for design, and even Clash and all that stuff for BIM coordination. But then it was like we leapfrogged into the construction space. Like we could do reality capture with drones and laser scanners, but it was really about execution. So you had scheduling tools and accounting tools, and you had everything on either end of the plan. So the plan itself was still like all these siloed solutions that weren't really talking together. And so you bring into a fresh group of stakeholders, new architect, new subcontractor, new builder, new owner. It's kind of a forced marriage. All right, we're all going to come together. We're all going to align on a vision magically somehow, and we're just going to go execute. Except we're going to rely on email and spreadsheets and file shares and things like that, or tools that are built for things outside of that pre-construction planning and procurement phase. Sounds like a recipe for success to me.
Yes. So just to create some context for the listener here, I would call those dead files, right? PDF, email, Excel spreadsheet, Word document. They're all dead data that we don't use. Now, according to Dodge and FMI, which are, industry publications that we all know and love and we try to keep up on, 95% of data goes unused in the construction industry, which is wild in this day and age with the push for AI and the use of data and the collection of data. It's all there. It's just that nobody's collecting it, nobody's using it. Which is just, it's crazy. It's crazy. And again, you're not a tech guy. You're not a coder. I'm not a coder. I don't want to be a coder. And you probably don't want to be one either. Right. But in order for that world and that type of professional and expertise to meet the needs of the public or any industry, you have to have an expert. You have to have somebody that can connect the dots. You have to have somebody that can communicate to those people in order to build something. Right. Like you have to have somebody that knows the needs, which is, what Andy is. And I don't think that you'd find a better candidate than somebody that had 25 years of experience on the design and build side of the table to do that, which is, that's incredible. So what is ConCntric, right? What is that platform, and what's the differentiator between other platforms or the way the industry works traditionally?
Sure. So, pre-construction is a space that, is loosely defined by a lot of folks. And not really understanding what Precon is, it made it harder to solve for it in and of itself. So pre-construction is all the planning phase from early on. You're talking to a potential client. You haven't won a project yet. You're talking to a potential client, and you're trying to identify what do they want to build. What are their needs? What are their aspirations?
No design, no nothing. This is like literally just a blank. This is a napkin. We're working on a blank napkin.
Yeah, I mean, this could be a lunch, a lunch with somebody or coffee, and or it's a phone call, and they call up and hey, we've been doing some analysis in house. We need to expand. We're going to, build a new hospital or a new wing, or we don't have enough parking. We need a parking structure, or we're going to build a new campus for senior living or a new office complex. So early on, just programmatically, what are you looking for? And then starting to work your way through identifying stakeholders, designers and industry experts that can be a part of that team. Then coming up with the concepts of what that thing might cost, how long it may take to build, what it ultimately might look like. And then you start to coordinate and work through really, finessing that down into something that you're comfortable, that you have an understanding of the scope, of the expectations of the owner, and the rest of the team, that you can say, I can do it for this amount of money, for this amount of time, and be willing to put, sign that contract and put your business on the table.
What's that word or phrase that we all love? VE.
VE,
right?
Value engineering.
Value engineering. So when you're trying to, just like Andy was just saying, right? Like value engineering, what it's called is what it is called when you're trying to get a project or an idea or a design down into somebody's budget, right? Which usually happens hopefully it happens in the pre-con phase. We don't do it while we're building, although that happens sometimes too. Some people call that devalue engineering, right? Because you have to take value out.
We always coach folks, there's two ways to look at it. There's value engineering, which depending on your perspective can be trying to pull all the money out. That's okay. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you need to do that. I mean, honestly, that happens. But we also talk about value optioneering, which has a more positive spin. The idea there is you're really just trying to drive as much value into the project as you can for the given budget and timeline. And knowing what the expectations are of everybody, you have to be able to be honest and transparent about what it's really going to take and be willing to have that tough conversation. But I think that's a necessary thing that professionals, know that they need to do. But I think, go back to your original question. I didn't do a very good job probably of answering it. So ConCntric is a pre-construction platform built for builders by builders. And I say that wholeheartedly, that myself, Steve, our CEO, I got folks scattered across my company that have all been in the industry. We have the best and brightest on the engineering side and the design UX side, but we also think we have some really great experience on the build side, where, we've all come from large GCs. We've all experienced large complex projects with aggressive timelines and scope changes and weather and all these other environmental factors that we now know that you have to be able to pivot pretty quick. The job sites are dynamic. They change by the second. Literally, the building is coming up in front of you, and all the things that it takes to put it together are constantly in movement. But before that ever happens, there's a whole lot of dynamic things that are happening in the planning phase. And so how do you do that? How do you move past these dead files that you mentioned into an environment, a space where you can collaborate together as a team of stakeholders? Everybody has a voice. Everybody needs to be informed of what's going on. Things are changing rather rapidly, in a typical project. So how do you work through that life cycle from program to conceptual design and estimating and find your way towards a budget and a schedule that will relate into a contract budget or a contract that makes sense and that everybody's comfortable with. So that's where we really have focused in and built something that is hosted in the cloud. So it's cloud native right out of the gate. It's intended to be collaborative. So bringing in all the stakeholders right out of the gate. Again, we want to make sure everybody's a part of that early process so you can develop, both your program, your timeline, your budget, the value engineering or value optioneering ideas that you need to start exploring early. And the quicker you can go through that process, I mean, it's amazing, the amount of waste or missed opportunity that exists out in the industry. People, change is always hard. Growth is hard sometimes, and people are busy and they have a lot going on their plate, and trying to manage a change in your workflow or where you keep your information. You've always known that your information is locked over here in this file, or it's in this data repository. So when we start to tweak these things a little bit, you have to have the appetite. But with ConCntric, we don't make it a really long, drawn out thing. We're very fortunate. We built something that is very intuitive to use. We have most users up and running within a couple of hours, not months. I've seen implementations take on years, and living through those at times hopefully not in a first person perspective, because again, I think if you're trying to implement change, you got to be able to do it really rapidly. And that's where technology like this really cannot take users months and months and months. They'll get busy and they'll go back to their old ways.
So can I ask you, when I think Precon, I think a few keywords, right? First one being design. You aren't conducting design in ConCntric, right? Is it like an upload or an integration? Or
Sure.
how do you bring in the design?
Right. So you're subject matter experts in design, whether that's architecture, structural, whatever. Our goal is not to go and disrupt the tools that they have today. Let's figure out how we leverage that information. Let's give them the ability to upload those files or share a link to it, or put that viewer in the first person of the platform so you can access it rather quickly. Understanding that those are all contextual inputs, right? We are not trying to design a building. We are not trying to develop the architect's vision. We're there to leverage that information in the pre-construction planning space.
So can I paraphrase that? Just
sure.
So just because there's a lot of people in our industry that are cavemen, right? So sometimes it's good to just connect the dots for them. So it's not replacing CAD, it's not replacing BIM, it's not replacing Autodesk, ACC, any of these words that you hear for companies, the designers, the architects, the engineers for designing their project. But what it is doing is it's giving you like a viewer, like you can see into that window, and they're taking the information from that design and they're extracting the information for you to leverage to make quicker decisions for bidding and construction and logistics and all those things. And I just said the next word that I want you to cover. So bidding, pricing. What do we got?
Yeah. So again, this is where our goal is to be able to integrate or weave these different workflows together. You think about bidding and bid solicitation. There's a whole group of software out there that were specifically built to do bid solicitation. But if you think about bid solicitation, but rather if you think about procurement at large, right? You're trying to buy out your project. You need resources, you need labor, you need confidence that you're going to get those things when you need them. And so it's really about planning. Ultimately buying things, and you can go to your local grocery store and buy a loaf of bread. But when you're trying to order, very specific doors and generators and things that take a long time to ultimately show up, get fabricated and show up on your job site, it's very complex. And so we look at procurement and think of it more of like a 6-chapter book, right? So the bid solicitation piece that we integrate with a couple of specific partners around this. The bid solicitation part is like chapter 5. Chapter 6 is, you're going to go and, do due diligence and do final sign off on contracts. But then the first 4 chapters, that's where you got to figure out what's the scope. What do we need to buy? When do we need to buy it? How much time is it going to take to go through a review process and a bidding process, get all the feedback, work through all the nuances, make sure we have that, crystal clear view of what the scope's supposed to be and the numbers to match. Then we can finally, bid level and award and all that. All that's chapters 1 through 4. So there's a whole host of things that need to be done in a pre-construction mindset long before you get to, hey, what's your price? How long do you think it'll take you to build or deliver this for us?
So what you've done is what you just illustrated is that you've taken the design, right, and you've made it a seamless connection between that and getting your bidding out to subcontractors, material vendors. You got to hire your mechanical, electrical, plumbing. You got to hire your door hardware guy, right? So you've integrated that process all the way through contracts. So are people executing contracts within the system, or is that something that it's exports and then they just they do that outside the system?
Again, we're focused on the planning part. So we integrate with tools like Autodesk and Building Connected. So they're going to go and do bid solicitation, work through that.
I was going to ask you if it was Building Connected, but I didn't want to throw the name out there because that's the industry standard, right? Like, so good for you guys for obviously integrating with them. I mean, a lot of people use Building Connected.
Yeah, and again, there's no value in us trying to build things that have already been built that people are already happy with. Where the opportunity is for us is to really partner and link those things together in a business workflow that makes a lot more sense. The last thing that you want to walk into a potential client, for us, as a product vendor is to walk and say, hey, I want to change and disrupt your business. That's never a good conversation. I'd rather come in and be able to augment your existing business processes, take out the waste, take out the friction, take out the things that are costing you money. How can we do that? So you've got these great tools that are already out there, whatever it is. Let's find a way to integrate it into a business workflow that really supports pre-construction, business development, business planning, business confidence. If you can do that and save people a bunch of time and give them some of their capacity back, to not go and dig through files, go digging through emails to try and build an archaeology project to explain how did you arrive at this point in the project where you're still over budget or you're not going to meet the schedule. That takes a ton of time. And that's what happens with a lot of pre-con efforts is people end up spending their time going back and trying to rebuild history or predict the future. And they're doing it without a really good data set. And so what we sought out to do was, let's take out the friction, let's partner, let's build a platform built on data first. So it's the company's name is ConCntric, but we are customer-centric and data-centric first in that order. We listen very closely to our customers. We take new customers on and believe that they are our partners, and we want them to be a part of our journey of building this platform. And we have incredible partners, but we also want them to be able to come to trust in the data that they're bringing into the platform. So we curate that information. We do quality checks. We make sure they have really, really good data hygiene. And so when they want to go in and they want to compare projects together and see, how would the same project that you built 5 years ago while blocked down the street, what would that cost today? Time and money are never on our side. It's always going to cost more money, and the schedule is always going to compress. At least that's how it seems.
Yeah, right.
So how can we take the data that you're bringing in, normalize it to today's dollars based on geography or just time itself, and say, okay, I want to build the same project, the same 5-story, 80-bed, complex, state-of-the-art hospital facility or lab. I want to build that same building today. I want to take the one I already built and build the exact same thing. What's it going to cost today? The average person probably thinks it should cost the same amount. You take the cost of the property out, the building's the building.
Had that conversation before.
Yeah, the cost automatically, they're going to go up, and that's just, it's inflation, it's interest rates, it's all these fun things, these other environmental factors that affect project delivery.
So I think, you touched on something that I think is, I don't know if it's above the average person's level of thinking or if it's just something that you don't realize. And I've realized it is that a lot of the innovation that's happening today isn't to replace, it is to consolidate, right? Or to connect. And what do I mean by that? I mean, like, you're not seeing a lot of whether it's construction software, management software, or new apps or things like that for anything. It's not to say, hey, this one's new and better, move heaven and earth to adopt it because it's better. It's hey, I in the construction industry did this, right? They built amazing tools for bidding. They built amazing tools for document management. They built amazing tools for operations. They built amazing accounting tools. Now I have, and then design, and oh my God, now it takes 5 to 7 software platforms to run a project, right? And to back out of that is a huge investment, money, time, risk in, transition, data loss, screwing things up, for lack of a better word, right? So where the impact seems to be coming are in platforms like this, right? Where you're integrating the design software with the bidding software. So it's an interesting perspective to make people aware of, especially the young people that have the entrepreneurial mindset and want to change the game in one way or another. So it's just an interesting point to bring up. Now, we talked about design, and then we talked about the pricing and scope coverage. I also think about logistics and scheduling. So how does that play into the Precon platform?
Yeah. So, once you get your basic program in your head of what you want to go build, then the next obvious questions are how much and how long, right? What's it going to cost? How long it's going to take to build it? And can we have business confidence that we can deliver with those expectations? Otherwise, you get into things like liquidated damages and all that. So we built an integrated planning tool in the platform that is similar to like a traditional scheduling tool in some ways, but that's kind of that's just the beginning. And so, yes, we can create a Gantt view. We can, spit out like a list of dates and all that fun stuff, but that's not really planning. That's not really collaborating on a critical path with getting all your stakeholders in conversation. So we built a tool that allows you to build a critical path with milestones. We think that that's a really fundamentally important thing to understand about a project. So when are you starting? When do you need to have these check-in points, 50% DDs, 50% construction drawings, and work your way through that process? But there's a whole lot of context that goes into each one of those milestones. So we look at a milestone and think of it as really a container of information. There's drawings, there's specs, there's models, there's pictures, there's laser scans, there's all kinds of context. Now, let's understand, that can happen. But before we get too far down the road, let's make it simple. When do you want to start planning? When do you want to start construction? And when do you need to deliver that thing? As they say, when do you want, it's a hospital, when do you want heads in beds? If it's a parking structure, when do you want cars in the space? And so you back into that and go, okay, we have 14 months to deliver this thing. You stand back with your team of stakeholders. You're all looking at the same presentation-friendly environment that we've built and go, does that make sense? Is that logical? And then you start thinking about, okay, let's break this down a little bit. So we know kind of the endpoints, the constraints. What's it going to take? We got to do programming. We got to do schematic design, conceptual design, design development. We're going to do some bid work along the way. We're going to bring subcontractors in. VDC is going to get involved. They're going to have a bite at the apple in terms of coordination. Procurement's going to want to get involved sooner rather than later because, ordering generators and long lead items, and these things aren't sitting on a shelf somewhere. You put in a generator order today, maybe 6 or 12 months before you ever get wind of that thing. Same thing for steel, same thing for brick. I mean, a lot of these, commodities that you really need are complex things that need to be, reviewed, revised, and then ultimately fabricated and put into logistics. So, you can't do procurement, honestly, fast enough on most projects. So that's where you got to think of this very holistically. And I think that's where we do a really good job of bringing everybody in. So we help, visually go through a whiteboarding process where you start to work through the large tranches of time for those big efforts, parallel those with your milestone and, start to break those in. Does this make sense? Is this an achievable timeline? Can I still take my kids to baseball practice? Like that kind of mindset. We can go fast, right? But going fast sometimes has a price too. So what's logical? What makes sense? Then let's go and work towards that timeline. And sometimes you don't have a choice. The deadline's the deadline, and you got to work your way back from that and figure out how to make it happen. But once you have that plan, right? So we set the seed, we create that milestone timeline or the critical path, and we, create that seed of a timeline. Then we start building off of that. So we had this concept, like I mentioned earlier, of intersections, where now we want to intersect what we're doing from a time planning tool to a buyout planning, or to a value optioneering or design, coordination. We need to make decisions at certain points in time about the project. And so we have all these different components on these large complex projects. And we're not, so much focused on, like a single family house. We're talking about healthcare campuses and college campuses where you're building, 3, 4, 5, 10 projects at a time, but they're all a part of one big contract. So you got to manage the parking structure. You got to manage the office building. You got to manage the hospital and the ORs. And there's all these major components. And so when we start to piece together the
Andy,
timeline,
can I ask you something? So are you part of what you're describing? You said you have the scheduler just like normal people use in the Gantt chart, which if anybody doesn't know what a Gantt chart is, it's like your bar graph that, it's like a sideways bar graph where you see tasks happening on a schedule and you get that cascading waterfall, that nice domino effect that goes down that we all like.
Hopefully.
This information that you're talking about, is it connecting to other information outside of that schedule?
Yeah. So the platform is built with basically 24 modules of different things that are, focal areas. So whether it's scheduling or buyout or value engineering, like you mentioned, but all of what we've really prided ourselves on is building intersections between these different things where, you have time, but you also have cost. You also have, these creative problem solving things you need to work through. So yeah, they're all interrelated. So it kind of gives you a 360-degree view of the project and the different challenges along the way that you really need to think through. Cause it's not like I have this one issue and I solved that and I'm done. It's like, no. To solve this one issue, I've also got to think about these other 6 things that are affecting or going to impact one another. So
in other words, whether you build a schedule in P6 or Microsoft Project or Excel, if you're really old school, or a spiral notebook, uh, um, that's another example of a dead file, right? So we're talking about that not being a dead file, essentially. Is that right?
Right. It's becoming the seed for building that long-term master schedule, but early on, you need enough sophistication, enough complexity to build dependencies between activities and understand that if you start to slide things to the right, what's going to happen. But we really look at it as a really great planning tool for the pre-construction stakeholders, architects, owners, estimators, everybody who's a part of that pre-con stage. And then ultimately, at some point, far enough to the right, we say, okay, this represents the critical path that we want to be on. And let's use that as the seed to build out that super complex master schedule that you're going to use for, you're putting in foundation. So you got to dig the hole, you got to form you've got to form whatever you're building. You got to put in your rebar and pour the concrete and strip the forms. Like there's a whole lot of other stuff. But in pre-con, it's like big picture. When do we want to start doing earthwork?
So
let's talk through that high level.
One of two things must happen at the end of pre-con, right? You either have an export that you then take into the construction process, or this software is a little more than pre-con and it lingers into the construction process. Which is it?
So I rarely ever see pre-con and construction have this clear defined line where all right, we're done pre-conning, let's go build. Like that's not a thing that unfortunately in my career, I have rarely ever seen that happen.
True.
I've experienced projects where pre-construction went up until about a week before construction was done because you were still doing final buyout on furniture and things like that. So again, that's where I come back to. I think that when you're delivering these large complex projects, pre-con is in stages as you start to hand over different parts of the project. And so that plan, that critical path is something that is used as a seed to develop the rest of that master schedule. And you're going to evolve that as the project goes on as well. And that's where we're working with not only your owner, but the tenant, like who's operating that facility. If you're doing a repositioning project where you got to move people around and, move where they park. And there's just a lot of intricacies that you have to really think through in that planning stage that the average consumer does not have any concept of. That they're just
can manage
6 months, and that's not how it works.
So you can use this tool to manage the schedule throughout the construction project and update it. And there's no clear handoff where we're not doing it in here anymore. It's exported. It's in P6 or it's in Microsoft Project from here out.
Well, the focus here, and maybe I should be a little more clear. We're focused on pre-con. So when you're ready to hand over a schedule to the operations team, they're going to take that schedule and develop it to the fully rich detail that they need to manage construction in the field. We are establishing that critical path and the major activities and thinking through big picture how you're going to manage through that. Not every single, detailed thing that has to happen when you get to the construction phase. But we do want that input from the operations team. We want the experienced builders. We want that senior, seasoned superintendent or project manager to be a part of the pre-construction stage because they're helping to set the plan. The way that we look at it is, you have a good plan in pre-con. Your opportunity to make money is in pre-con. When you get to the operation stage, your opportunity is to try not to lose money. You may find some other things that pop up along the way that, if you got a shared savings agreement of some sort or something like that, and that is usually a motivator to go fast and deliver, and exceed expectations. But where we see the opportunity is let's help you do as much planning and risk mitigation in that pre-con stage. When you hand off to operations, if you've had a good plan, you've had their input, they're bought into that plan, they've had their say on the things that needed to be, haggled over. Now let's go execute. Let's go build this thing and do what we plan to do. So plan the build the plan.
So that's you just highlighted something that I love to tell people. And it's really between a GC and the subcontractors, right? In a construction GC's office, the estimators go to, the St. Louis Blues game and they go to the Cardinals game and they get wined and dined to win projects, right? People love to take out the pre-con people. And that's because they make the money, right? That's who gets the contracts. That's who gets awarded the contracts. And the operations people are seen purely as people that can cost people money, right? It's once it's in construction, it's risk, right? So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you have somebody, it's the old Bill Parcells, if they're going to cook the meal, let them help shop for the groceries type of deal, right? Mm-hmm. So what you just highlighted is a critical relationship. It's that handoff that poses so much risk in this industry. And the stronger tool that you have for that handoff, and the more people that you can get integrated into using that tool, again, go back to that curve. You're going to start off high in diligence and time, but overall cost in duration and budget are going to go down, which means more profit for everybody. More money stays in people's pocket, which is great. Andy, I know you got to go, so there's just one more thing that I'd like to ask you about as we come up on time here. Now, it's Precon, right? We've made the delineation that this is all Precon. That's what we care about. We're purely not talking about operations, meaning that we're not even really talking about blue collar people using this tool, right? And I think for me, there's a misconception that AI and robots are coming for everybody's job, right? Now, how do you guys see AI being used with a platform like this? How do you see AI affecting the industry in general? Is AI coming for the blue collar man or woman?
I would say there's a pretty rare occurrence where I'm going to see AI go and build a building by itself. They don't have any arms or legs. Now, there are robotics that obviously have AI built into them. I think that AI is fundamentally here to augment the HI, the human intelligence, the human capability. It's a tool like any other tool. It can be used well. It can also tell you stories. If you played much with different AI and GPT type tools, I mean, they're great. They are fundamentally awesome. I use stuff like that all the time because it helps me write letters faster. It helps me paraphrase concepts quicker. And I think if you use it for the right purpose, it's fantastic. It saves you a ton of time. And again, helps you get those repetition things out of the way that you can really focus in on the task at hand, the plan, the execution. So I don't think it's coming for your jobs. I think it's understanding you have a new tool, just like, at one point in time we had CAD. Now all of a sudden, all the pencil makers are probably nervous, right? And then we had BIM, and now all the CAD people are probably nervous. Well, businesses don't change overnight. It takes time to adopt that change. I think AI is like any other solution. But I think whether it's considered white collar or blue collar, I think those lines are being blurred also. Again, the technology today is enabling people to do more things better in some regards. I got to be careful there. I don't like to generalize too much, but at the very least, it's allowing them to have more capacity to do the things well. And I think that's the distinction is, I don't think because there's AI or any other software that all of a sudden you're like a superhero. I think what changed was you have capacity to think. You have capacity to coordinate and talk to other people, pick up the phone, have a meeting, go have lunch, be humans. That's something about ConCntric that was something that really interested me when I first came on was we are human first. It's built into our DNA. We talk about it all the time. And we want to make sure that we partner with our customers. We don't sell them software. Mm-hmm. We hope to give them an experience from a customer to business perspective. But more importantly, we hope that we're building tools that allow them to provide their clients with an experience that is in their mind's eye, what buildings should be like, what pre-construction should be like. That's the goal. The goal is to create a human first approach. So, we're human first. We're building a platform that we think speaks to white collar, blue collar, pink collar, red collar, whatever color you want to wear, because it's not really so important that we're focused on any one persona. Everybody has an important part to contribute in the conversation. And we need to make sure that you're listening to as many folks as possible so that that plan that ultimately comes to serve the project needs is one that has probably been fought over a little bit, but has everybody, in the same frame of mind that they've all had their opportunity to voice their ideas or their concerns. We've worked through them. We've mitigated any risk or planning issues. And now we're going to go build this amazing thing that, we're going to do it at light speed probably because, you can't build the pyramids in 1,000 years these days. And people want an office building or they want a hospital and they want it as fast as humanly possible with more complexity than you can imagine. So that's where I think the opportunity is to build a platform and an experience, following that is something that is what is in your mind's eye, a great experience.
So for anybody listening, I just want to highlight that this is like the 10th person that I have had on here that has said exactly what I've been telling everybody. And I've never talked to Andy before today. And it's that, listen, we as an industry are out there to not lose the game. We're the quarterback that manages, a lot of people are the quarterback that manages the game to not lose it instead of to go out there and win it. And what do I mean by that? Just like you just said, too many people are focused on the minutia, the reporting and the tasks that they have to do to keep up with requirements and standards and to cover your butt, as opposed to and managing by crisis, as opposed to being proactive, being proficient, and more profitable. Right. That's where AI is going to come into play. It's going to enable the human to do what the human should be focusing on to deliver that product at the end of the day. So I think you articulated that incredibly well. So I appreciate that, Andy. Any advice for anybody? I always like to throw it up there if you have any advice that you'd like to give anybody on coming into the industry.
What I would say is, don't be afraid of where you're coming from. Be focused on where you're going. Take risk, learn, put your hand up. Something new comes in the door, and like, hey, would you like to try, flying drones or running ConCntric? Be the first person to raise your hand. Dive in first. Be the early adopter. Be brave. Be committed. Some of these things take time to really nail down, but I'll tell you, those who take the risk early, those who become the experts early, that's where you make money. That is where you make a career for yourself. That's where you're able to raise a family. And have confidence that you're on a good path. So be fearless.
Listen, Bill Gates isn't a particularly smart guy, or he's not smarter than everybody else. Bill Gates had, by the time he graduated high school, more than 20,000 hours coding on computers, because he had access to a computer that he went to at 3 a.m. at University of Washington. Right. So when he hit the college level, he was 20,000 hours ahead of everybody else. That's why Bill Gates is who he is. Smart guy, but not that smart. He's not that much smarter than everybody else. So, Andy, what Andy just said, speaks to that. Say yes and get the experience ahead of the curve. So Andy, I appreciate you coming on. Where can they follow ConCntric? If somebody wants to use this in their business, how do they find you? How do they find that product?
So ConCntric.com. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. But feel free to reach out. Happy to talk to anybody who's excited to transform their business and really make it efficient and have a great experience. So appreciate you having me on, Ike. It's been a fun conversation. It's always fun to sit back and really talk about the fundamentals of this industry and where we're going. Amazing opportunities out there. So thanks again for having me on.
Incredible. All right, everybody. Again, you can catch this on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or YouTube, and you can catch me on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube at The Construction Mentor. And I think if you just type in Construction Mentor Podcast, you'll find it. So everybody be good.